So basically, I'm never going to point out a grammatical error again.
The chapter titles are so good.
Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, Chapter 3, The Letters Known.
I think there is something about this chapter that's kind of unique. The sort of escalation of ridiculousness isn't really like anything else in Harry Potter. I think that overall, the central idea of this book is it's this journey from, the real world into the fantasy world. And what we have here is this, bizarre intrusion of the fantasy world upon the real world, where it's just completely escalating out of control. I feel like the way Jo is thinking about the world of magic here is a little bit different from the way she thinks about it in subsequent books.
With the story arc of the first couple chapters of Harry being with the Dursleys and his letter coming in and the intrusion occurring, she probably realized that it's going to be kind of ridiculous, that maybe she thought this is a necessary part of, to show that something crazy is about to happen.
Well, that's the thing, though. Because the Muggle world, as exemplified by the Dursleys in Privet Drive here, is like a world of order, like the neatly trimmed hedges and all that. And here, basically, magic is chaos.
There's a good line, not in this chapter, but in the first chapter. McGonagall tells Dumbledore, you couldn't find people any less like us, regarding the Dursleys. I've always found a strange line, because what does she mean by that? The Dursleys are really Muggle-y. What is she referring to there in like us, as if all wizards have a certain personality that is different than all Muggles, which I feel like it backs up with this too, and what you're saying, and that in this book at least, she represents wizarding culture as being a very whimsical thing as compared to Muggle culture, and that very much fades later on as you get to more complex wizard characters who are very Dursley-ish themselves.
Speaking of the first chapter, later on in the books, we never really get the indication that everybody wears cloaks all the time when they're traveling or when they're out and about having a good time, which is something you might have inferred from the first chapter and sort of goes along with these whimsical wizards. And they wear brightly colored cloaks.
Cloaks.
I'm just saying, a lot of times people were just wearing robes. It didn't specify later on that, everybody puts on their cloak before they leave Grimmauld Place or something.
There's all kinds of oddities like that in the first book. I feel like there's always a certain amount of social commentary in Harry Potter, even if it's just sort of really standard British commentary on class, because in England, everything is class. Everything's about class, basically. Most of their literature tends to be, from my experience. Whereas in the first book, it's very much the opposition between the wizard world and the Muggle world. Those are the sort of extremes that you're contrasting against one another. And then in later books, you sort of cast the Muggle world aside. The Muggle world becomes almost entirely irrelevant. And it's more about making that clash and making those contrasts within the context of the wizarding world.
Absolutely. That's very interesting, too. I never thought about that. The fact that the Dursley characters were written by what was she? She was late 20s and had a child and was poor and whatnot. So
that is interesting to think about that. She does always sort of paint the Dursleys as these stupid yuppies, but then to think about that of her actual position there, there's the line about how all of Dudley's stuff is broken except the books are untouched, and you can kind of feel that in there, of that sort of poking fun of oh, silly rich kids don't read books, because they have too much crap.
Later on, the social commentary comes more into focus with Dobby and the Malfoys and the Death Eaters and etc. And Hermione being called all these things, but I'd never thought about the fact that it sort of is beginning in this very first chapter with the Dursleys being well-off people who are not just not cool, basically. Jo was sitting in her little Edinburgh apartment listening to the Smiths with her baby, living off whatever the British equivalent of food stamps was, and making fun of all the rich people she sees out and about with their kids wearing ridiculous clothes. Do either of you remember anything in any of the 7 books, any undertakings by any of the characters that required as much effort and as much passion as Vernon Dursley's attempt to no longer receive the letters. It escalates to that ridiculous level with the letters, all because his character at this point he's on a mission from God or something. Like he's driving around, assuming that people are tailing him, and then he gets out of the car and he's muttering to himself, and he goes and buys a fucking shotgun. So in case the wizards come, he's gonna fucking shoot them. I don't think I've ever felt a great deal of respect for him, obviously, but it's hard not to note that he just does something right here that requires an unimaginable amount of spirit to haul your family away to a little island.
No.
No?
I don't. Well, what I'm saying is no. In answer to your question, has anyone else in the Harry Potter series has anyone ever been so far as even want to go do look more like? No.
You say so. You.
I'm agreeing with your
my assessment of his character.
Yeah.
That
is I think you're correct. I don't think anything that anyone has ever done in Harry Potter has been undertaken with as much of a passionate and irrational devotion to get something done.
What about the real world? Has anybody ever done anything like what Vernon Dursley just did?
Probably not. That seems like a strange question.
No, for real though. I mean, it's one thing if you're like hiding from Nazis or something. I mean, he's running from something. Yeah, and it's. I mean, you could call it irrational, but in his mind, it's the most important thing in the world. Which it's really bizarre in the sense that I guess their way of thinking about this whole situation was that they had to keep the kid because Petunia isn't that evil that she would kick out her sister's kid.
Which is a very bizarre thing, that they are not evil enough to kick out the kid, yet they are evil enough to abuse him for 11 years. That's a strange line they take on that.
It really is. Maybe
they don't want him dead. They just don't particularly care if he's happy.
I don't know. I've never gotten the impression that the Dursleys would care if he died. I feel like they're just not murderers, but they wouldn't have been okay with it.
I don't know.
I don't think Harry would have survived if the Dursleys were really completely didn't care whether or not he lived. I mean, I think they don't want him in danger. I don't think they want him to be in danger, but they just don't like him and aren't that concerned with giving him a happy life. They could just, keep him in the basement and never let him go outside the house, never let him go to school, never tell any of their neighbors that they've got another kid living in their house. Which, essentially at times they do that kind of thing.
The more I think about the Dursleys, the less they make sense and the less I'm able to think about them in a rational way. I feel like they aren't meant to be scrutinized. You can't do it.
Well, I think that's kind of why they're pushed to the margins of the series a little bit later on. You see a lot less of them. In this book, they're important figures in Harry's life, but they become much less so as time goes on. As the books get a little bit more serious and a little bit more character-driven as opposed to whimsy-driven, cartoonish figures like the Dursleys seem less relevant. But
then, like in Order of the Phoenix, they're not even pushed to the side so much as they just become a little bit more serious.
That's true. That's definitely true.
They try to act like their old selves a little bit, but then Harry's like, Voldemort's fucking back, and Petunia's like, oh shit. And they have that moment.
What about the possibility that this book is written, and all of the books are written through the lens of Harry, and that maybe the reality is supposed to be a little bit bent here by the 10-year-old's experience?
You're calling Harry an unreliable narrator?
Yeah.
I've never seen the books in that way, but that would be kind of interesting.
Maybe that's why the Dursleys are so unrealistic, is because we are seeing it through the lens of a 10-year-old kid here, and that they were the same characters all along, but you can look at them in the light of this is a 10-year-old's exaggeration of his miserable childhood, and that they weren't as abusive as he makes them sound. They were certainly terribly cruel, but not straight out abusive as you might pick up from him.
Yeah, Harry as an unreliable narrator, that can be a fun way to look at the books, I think, but
ultimately problematic, though.
Yeah, I think it's kind of problematic. I don't think there's a lot in the books to support that reading. The book never hints that, Harry is kind of fudging the truth or delusional or anything like that. You could also kind of make a reading that Harry never leaves the Dursleys and he engages in these fantasies. And you can have all kinds of readings like that if you want.
Well, that's sort of... Maybe that's the conclusion to the discussion about his abusive childhood, is that he escapes into this magical world where his parents were killed by a wizard and they were wizards too, and yeah, that's pretty cool.
People write dumb things on the internet, dumb things on the internet, dumb things on the internet about how Pokemon is about Ash's delusions and he's in a mental institution and things like that. I mean, I see things like that from time to time. They're usually not really all that clever. They're usually just kind of dumb. And it's like, you can do this to anything. And I mean, sure, why not? It just kind of rubs me the wrong way a little bit, but
my own theory that he might be an unreliable narrator, I find that highly unlikely that Joe wrote it with that intent. I just think it's a semi-interesting way to think about the whimsy of the first couple books, is that they were whimsical because of Harry's age.
The chapter title is The Letters from No One. Do we really believe that? Is it just sort of a magical process whereby a couple different instruments create, like I know there's a magical quill that writes down the names of all the wizards and witches who were born in Great Britain so that 11 years later they can be sent to Hogwarts later? Are we to assume that it's just sort of the same thing where something like the trace is detected in Harry, and then the letters magically have the addresses appear on them, and then the owls magically know where to go? Or
do we even know enough to assume owls?
I don't know.
That implies that, there's a pack of owls sitting up there jamming them down the chimney, making them magically fly down. We do not know owls to be quite that magical.
Interestingly enough, the back of my book, which is
Mine too, it mentions owls, which it does not mention owls in the chapter.
Exactly. Well, yeah, it says, but all that is about to change when a mysterious letter arrives by Owl Messenger, a letter with an invitation to a wonderful place he never dreamed existed. So yeah, that implies that it's from an owl, but that could just be extrapolating on the fact that later on in the book, I mean, in the movies they made them owls, but that's not necessarily...
That isn't canon.
Well, it's not canon.
Interesting thing about, you mentioned the movies, I feel like this chapter is very cinematic in just the way it's written. Mm-hmm. It reads like a movie montage, kind of.
Yeah.
It's been a while since I've actually sat through the movie for real. I mean, I've watched the Wizard People Dear Reader, but I haven't actually, sat through the movie and paid attention to the things that are actually happening in the movie. But I feel like they do not get all they could out of the Letters from No One. I feel like they go straight from the house to the sea. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Well, that's true, but...
They do a nice job with the slow-mo shot of Harry jumping in the air in the dining room trying to grab the letter.
I didn't like that at all. I
was joking. I mean, it's a neat-looking shot, but it's also just ridiculous.
Well, they initially did quite a bit, though, at the house, or it's a montage sort of thing with a bunch of owls outside the house, and the letters keep coming in, and then they come through and then he boards up the fireplace, and then they come shooting through the fireplace, blah, blah, blah. Then they're immediately at the rock in the middle of the ocean. Or if you're saying that they should have also gone other places and had the letters arrive there, I'm going to disagree with you.
Oh, really?
Just from the perspective of just changing settings. We've been at Fort Privet Drive virtually the whole movie, and then it's just a quick setting change. He says, "We're going away, far away." And that's what Richard Griffith says in the movie. And then they're immediately at the sea, and I don't know if that would have been as dramatic as if they had suddenly been somewhere else, like a hotel room. And
I'm not saying like cut from here to another scene in the hotel room. I mean like a dramatic montage set to this madcap, over the top comedy music where like driving with him like wiping sweat from his brow and like a little farther now, and then we cut to a map and like zooming across the country with a line showing, and then him on top of a multi-story parking garage and like looking around and like no getting back in the car. And it's like all really fast paced, and I feel like there's a lot of mileage they could have gotten out of that they didn't. Not that I really care all that much. It's just more than almost anything else in the Harry Potter books. When I read this chapter, I have a very cinematic thing in mind. I have a movie montage of everything they're describing, and I sort of have a sense of the way it would be paced and everything. It's just kind of, I'm not saying that every movie adaptation should be exactly the way I envision it, but what I am saying is that I feel like they could have sucked more juice out of that and sort of played up the madness element of it in a way that they didn't.
I think the problem with such a montage would be that it would focus on Vernon rather than Harry, and the whole movie focuses on Harry, and it would be kind of, I mean, I'm not saying I would have a huge problem with it if there was like these couple minutes, because I was genuinely moved and enthralled by Vernon's epic heroic quest to escape the letters and the madness that he brought upon himself by undertaking such a quest. If they just had foregone the idea of making a direct adaptation of the first book and just made it sort of focused on Vernon, so it's like he's this guy who like has to deal with this little kid because his relatives died and left him this kid, and then these mysterious letters start arriving, and it's like horrifying, and he's driving around trying to escape, and he's always paranoid that somebody's following him, and he goes to these insane lengths, and then at the end he gets into this confrontation with this giant man, and he has a gun, and that would be kind of a badass movie.
You know, I'm talking about adding an additional minute. I'm talking about a minute-long sequence of them in different places where Harry's like, can I have the letter now, you stupid man? And we get a rising sense that not only is Harry having to deal with these oppressive relatives, he's also having to deal with this growing insanity. And so the sense that Harry's in a situation that he really should be getting out of is sort of building and building to the point where it's sort of screeches to a halt when they're at the Rock on the Sea and it's a quiet moment where he's all miserable. I'm not saying that we should change the focus of the movie to be about Vernon, although that might be fun. I might like a movie like that.
That sounds to me like a separate movie on its own right now. I mean, I'm sold on it after Tom's synopsis, so.
Thank you.
I noticed a grammatical error in the chapter.
Did you?
Yeah.
Oh.
Point me.
Oh, it's on page... I mean, point me?
Thank you.
Yeah. I'm not...
I was just going to play it nonchalant.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, no, it didn't even occur to me until I was... Yeah. Anyhow, do we really want to start this?
I think pointing out grammatical errors is... I mean, because they might not happen that often since these are... is a published novel.
This is another one of those distinctions that I care about that other people don't care about. That I don't really care that much about. It's just on page 4.
The end.